Hello and good morning. Welcome all staff members listening along, joining us at home. We are officially opening today's webinar, the most popular webinar of our series, and today's is Banter versus Bullying Behaviour. Just a warm welcome for any staff members who are joining us this morning. If you haven't been to any of our webinars before, then a huge welcome to you. Just to let you in on how it's kind of going to work, today's webinar is going to be very interactive. There's going to be quite a lot of interactive polls that you're going to be able to vote on in real time. That's going to pop up on your screen. We also have our Q&A function, which you should be able to see. Please do ask and send in any comments and any questions throughout today's training. We are going to have a section at the end in which I'm going to be answering these in real time, answering your questions. We have our fantastic, lovely moderator, Hannah, who's going to be working behind the scenes to answer any questions, but also to help you with some links and helpful resources, which you should be able to see right now. Now, as we wait for a few people to join, we've got quite a lot of people registered for today's session. What we're going to do is just a nice quick icebreaker and an introduction to the type of interactive polls that I'm talking about. So we're just going to get one on screen for you now. It's just a quick icebreaker and something for you to vote on. You should be able to see it, and it's quite simply Marmite. Love it, hate it, or actually the stereotype is completely false. You're in the middle. Have a look, see if you can vote, and it's a little fun, little icebreaker as we wait for people to join. There's quite a lot of you, 80% of you voted already, and it would seem that the majority are sticking through stereotype. Love it or hate it. The thing is, I'm one of those rule breakers. I'm indifferent. I'm in the middle. It's all right. Not great. Not terrible. What do you lovely staff members think at home? We've got 87% of you voting so far. It's quite a good little turnout. I'm going to give you probably about 5 more seconds to vote on this one. And then I'm actually quite curious as to what you think of the next icebreaker. This one will probably require a little bit more thought. It's a bit of a tough decision. I'll give you 3 seconds to vote on this one. 2, 1. All right, let's have a look at these answers. So as you can see, actually we've got the majority of people hating it this morning. A few of you love it, and we do have 11% of you are the same as me, kind of in the middle. Stereotype is false. Okay. Well, you know what? We'll do one more. Let's have a look and see which way you think you'll vote. So you're at a wedding. Which table would you rather sit at? Would you rather be at a table with Freddie Mercury, Emma Thompson, David Attenborough, Michael Jackson, Morgan Freeman, John Lennon, or Aretha Franklin, Audrey Hepburn, and Robin Williams? Some very good wedding guests. Who's getting married? That's incredible. I'll give you a few seconds to vote on this one. This one's a little bit trickier. Got 75% of you. There is actually a very popular table, which is, it's clear to see why, I have to admit. I'm going to give you a few more seconds to think about this one. Got 81% of you voting so far. I'll give you another 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. As we can see, the table with Freddie Mercury, Emma Thompson, and David Attenborough is definitely the most. Is it perhaps because they're all British icons? Maybe. Aretha Franklin, Audrey Hepburn, and Robin Williams. That's going to be a very, very fun table. And then also Michael Jackson, Morgan Freeman, John Lennon. Interesting. I think, not that I can hear anyone asking me, but I think probably I would also have to go for the first one. It's going to be fun, isn't it? You have a dance with Freddie, have a good drink with Emma, and then David Attenborough, you're just going to be talking well into the early hours. Very, very good wedding guests. So it's just a little bit of fun, a chance for me to get to know all of our lovely staff listening along at home. But I do want to officially give you a very warm welcome to today's webinar. It is Banter versus Bullying Behaviour, and this is probably one of the most sought after topics from what we've been told from staff that we'd like to dive into a little bit more. And just a welcome to our webinar series. If you haven't been with us before, we tried to think about, now that we're not physically in schools, how can we still maintain a delivery? How do we still offer something to those stuck at home in lockdown who need it most? That's obviously students, but also staff wanting to learn about anti-bullying and the tangible things that we can do when we gear up to go back into school. So just a little introduction about myself. So my name's Charlton. My role is an anti-bullying training coordinator, which essentially means for the last 2 years, my job has been to go and travel around the UK into primary schools and secondary schools and deliver our anti-bullying ambassador program, which really puts the emphasis on young people taking on more responsibility to be that upstander in their schools and communities, and crucially to offer their emotional support to anybody who might be going through bullying behaviour or anything negative in their school. But we also train fantastic staff members to be that anti-bullying staff lead and to really help to grow and facilitate the ambassador program in their schools and in their communities. Now, just a little bit of random info. I absolutely adore pistachio ice cream. Quite a bougie choice, but it's brilliant. I dislike now people who just chill with their mouths constantly open. Now, in the spirit of anti-bullying, it's not that I have anything against these types of people, more just the habit. But I don't trust it. If you're just relaxing, your mouth's constantly open, do you not notice? Do you not get dry mouth? You're not going to catch flies? It's odd. I just have too many questions about this type of habit. And a random fact, my great-grandfather was in fact the mayor of Scarborough. And I don't really have much more to say on it, and that's just the way it was. So that's a little bit about myself. Have a look at today's aims of the webinar. So these are things that by the end of today's training, I'm hoping that everybody listening along will have achieved and will have learned, and we'll see as we go through. So the first one is simply defining bullying behaviour and banter. What's the difference? Is there a difference? How do we draw that line? And we're going to explore that in quite a little bit of detail today. Next, to understand the difference. So once we've defined bullying behaviour, we've defined banter, we're really going to explore that difference. What do we think the difference is with a perspective between young people? Is there a difference between that perspective and adults or staff? And all of the kind of issues around that. Next, to increase our confidence in speaking to students about the difference between banter and bullying behaviour. How do we engage in that dialogue? How do we really cement that understanding? How do we change this type of culture in school? And then finally, to understand some of the main causes of bullying behaviour. What leads a student to act in this way? What are the things going on behind the scenes? And then we'll also go through some issues around signposting for support and some resources that could hopefully help staff listening along, but also students at home and crucially parents, as they play a massive part in the school community. So these are aims, and we'll be addressing these as we go through, and hopefully this is what we will have achieved by the end of today's training session. So we're just going to dive straight into it, and we're going to start off by exploring the definitions of these two different things. So we're going to start off with banter. Now this is something that, I mean, it's been around for absolutely years and years and years. When I was in school, this was absolutely always used as a justification for you to be able to say anything you want, to insult anyone, to offend someone, and that was the kind of thing that you hid behind. It was just banter. Take a joke. Don't worry, I didn't mean it. But where do we draw that line? Is there a simple definition? So as we've been exploring it, I've been asking these questions to staff and students, thousands for the last 2 years. And we have kind of come up with a very simple definition of banter. And it is very quite simply when the other person or people are in on the joke. So you are perhaps having a laugh with someone, you are making a joke, you could be taking the mick. However, if you know that the other person knows it's a joke, that is banter. If the other person's not too sure, or if you're not sure that they know that what you're saying isn't malicious, that's when you're definitely in dangerous territory. And the thing is, I quite like this definition because it's very simple, it's very easy to understand, and it kind of removes that grey area, removes that ambiguity as to whether it's acceptable to say something offensive. Well, actually, if the other person knows that there's no malice, that they are in on the joke, then that's your simple definition. Now, what can we tangibly do in our schools to try and get this definition across? Well, this can be a very simple poster that you can put up in class. You can have it in the classroom, you can have it at a notice board, at an entrance or an exit to school, and just have it up so that everybody in your school is very, very clear as to what banter is, and then crucially, what it isn't. So then, if this is banter, what do we define as bullying behaviour, and how do we highlight that difference? So you are going to hear me use that phrase quite a lot, and we do it very purposefully. If you've seen any of our webinars before, you know that we explore this in every session. If you haven't, don't worry, we're going to go through it now. Bullying behavior is what actually we describe as repeated negative behavior that is intended to make others feel upset, uncomfortable, or unsafe. Now, you will see this written and you will hear me say bullying behavior very purposefully, rather than bullying. As an organization at the Diana Award, we're really trying to change this culture of labeling students as bullies and every situation as bullying. Now, for me, this is just my own personal opinion. The term bullying is bandied around far too frequently. And if you're labeling every situation as bullying, what's happening to those students who really are experiencing bullying behavior? They're just going to get lost in this tide of labeling, and they're not going to be treated with the same level of severity. And actually, if you label a child, let's not forget they are still children, as a bully, what really is that going to achieve? Are you giving that student any kind of leeway to change? Or actually, are they so much more likely to live up to that behavior because they have that label? They're going to get that reputation with their peers, with staff, with parents, and they are so much more likely to live up to that. By describing bullying as a behavior choice, we then describe it as something that's temporary and that's possible to change. And actually, bullying behavior, this is something that a student or child or someone can self-reflect and they can change that behavior. They're not defined by a label, they're not ring-fenced by something. And it actually is really helpful to change that type of culture. Now, in this definition, there are 3 keywords, and we're going to explore these in a little bit more detail next. So the first keyword in this definition is repeated. Does bullying need to happen more than once? Can it just be a one-off? And it's actually interesting, and I've discussed this with staff quite often, but we would say at the Daniel Award that it absolutely does need to happen more than once, because, and I'm going to test this function actually. Can you please give me a virtual raise of the hand if you've had a terrible day and you've done or said something you didn't mean? Absolutely, I definitely categorize myself in this. I think most people can identify with that. But those of you listening along who did raise a virtual hand, would you like to be considered a bully because of what you said? Or actually, were you feeling perhaps quite emotional, you've reacted incorrectly, or you've just come from something that's driven you to act in this way, but you wouldn't like to be called bullies because it's a one-off incident? We want to give students, we want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but also the chance to change that behavior. Bullying behavior is entirely different. This is when something is sustained, it's targeted, it's happening again and again. Repeated, very important in a definition. Now, the next one might surprise you, but it's often omitted in quite a lot of definitions, but a really important inclusion, and that's negative. Now, especially in primary school, one of the most popular definitions of bullying that I've heard from staff and students is the acronym STOP. This is several times on purpose. But we're missing a crucial element here, because those of you listening along at home, you could send me your postal address. I could all send you a donut in the post several times on purpose. Of course, that's not bullying behavior. So whatever it is must be negative, has to be included in a definition, something that's negative on somebody else. And finally is intent. Does bullying need to happen on purpose? Can you bully somebody accidentally? Now, again, as an organization at the Diana Award, we would say that absolutely intent is crucial here. And for me personally, this is the most important part of the definition, is this notion of intent. You cannot bully somebody accidentally. It is grossly inappropriate to label a child, especially in primary school, to label a young student as a bully if they genuinely have no idea the impact, the effect of their words or actions. And let us think about perhaps young people that are on the autistic spectrum or have special or additional needs. Perhaps they struggle to recognize different facial expressions, body language, or typical social cues. And in the eyes of typical social norms, they might be saying a comment or acting in a certain way repeatedly that is perceived as negative. But if they have no idea that they're upsetting someone, is it appropriate to label that as bullying and them as a bully? Absolutely not. And that goes for any student in school. There's a big difference between bullying behavior, which would probably lead to disciplinary procedures like detention or having a meeting with the headmaster or whatever it is, and then perhaps a relationship conflict where people have just fallen out, or when you are doing something that you don't know the impact, that's going to be education and awareness. And that education and awareness session is basically explaining to young people, you've actually really upset somebody by this action or these words, and then you are giving them a choice. If you've explained that to somebody, you're then giving them a choice as to whether they'd want to continue knowing the impact. And if they do that, then they are exhibiting bullying behavior, but we want to give our students the chance first. And this is a real focus point for our ambassador program, for students to take on more responsibility to make fellow students aware of their impact, peer-to-peer support, but also peer-to-peer responsibility. Because you staff listening along, you know that you cannot deal with all of these issues by yourself. There's simply not enough in you in school. You are overworked and underpaid. Virtual hand raise if you agree with that. I absolutely understand. And so we need students to take on more responsibility and to offer their support and also communicate to you staff what's actually going on in school. So this is our definition of bullying behavior. We've had our definition of banter, and here it is up on screen in a really, really simple manner. And the reason I put this up is because this can be a very simple win. This is something that you can put up as a staff member up in your classrooms. But crucially, one thing I would say is it's so important to make sure that parents are aware of your definition of both. Because again, I'm going to ask you again, a virtual hand raise, if you have had a parent come in all guns blazing in school, my child's being bullied, what are you going to do about it? Parents are very, very quick to assume a situation is bullying behavior, often because they don't understand a true definition. So if you have this up in school, that bullying behavior must be repeated and intentional, and that banter is when the other person's in on the joke, you have a very clear differential here. And this can be a very good way to address behavior with students in school. Say you have a situation in the playground, a student comes up to you, Miss or Sir, I'm being bullied. Say, okay, well, you know our definition. Let's go to the notice board. Has it happened more than once? Oh, actually, no. Okay, so maybe you've just fallen out, or maybe someone's saying something to you don't like. And the other person might be like, oh, it's just banter. Okay, well, let's have a look at our definition. You go to the other student. Are you in on the joke? And the student says no. All of a sudden, we know this isn't banter. So if you continue, you're going to be exhibiting bullying behavior. How do you want to proceed? Without raising your voice, without going through any disciplinary procedures, you very calmly just address the definitions that you have up in school, and you are allowing students to make their own decision as to how they'd like to proceed. This could be a really good way of something you can either send to students now in lockdown. You could do a poster competition, make it as nice design as however you want, but make sure this is up in school and that parents, crucially, have access to it as well. It could also be published on your school website. So hopefully, this has just explained a very clear difference between the two, and perhaps something that you could do to send out to students and get them to start thinking about these types of things as we gear up to come back to school, whenever that may be. So we're going to do an activity now, which is probably my favorite bit of today's training, and it's an agree or disagree spectrum, because we talked about defining both bullying and banter and understanding the difference. But how do we engage in the types of communication and dialogue with our students to explain that difference? And I'm going to do an activity with you now, listening along, that could hopefully you could do when students return, that you might find enjoyable, but also helps to explain those different nuances between those two definitions. So what we're going to do, I'm going to put a statement up on screen, and we're going to get the interactive poll again, and you're going to vote as to whether you strongly agree, disagree, strongly disagree on the statements that are going to come up on screen, and then I'm going to explore these in a little bit more detail. So the first one is going to be coming up now. Statement number 1, banter is as problematic as bullying behavior. Do you strongly agree with that? Agree, disagree, or strongly disagree with that statement? I'm going to give you a few seconds to see which way you vote. Okay, we have about 70% of you voting so far, so I'll give you a little bit longer. Very interesting to see the results coming in. This is good for my activity because we're definitely going to have to explore this. There's a big difference in opinion, which is good. This is exactly what we want. Celebrate that difference and explore why people can have different perspectives of the same statement and the same topic. We have 77% of you voting so far, so I'm probably going to give you 5 more seconds and we have a couple to go through afterwards. Give you 3, 2, 1. Let's have a look. So, as you can see, we have 32% of you agree that banter is as problematic as bullying. We have 60% of you disagreeing with that, and then we have a couple that strongly disagree. Now, the reason I love this is because staff members listening along at home, you're all going to have obvious, brilliant intentions. You're going to want the best for your students. You're going to want to address these different issues. And yet, even just those of you attending today's webinar, there's a very clear difference in this type of perspective. So those of you that agree that banter is as problematic as bullying, I'm going to have to kind of assume your reasoning, and you can give me a virtual hand raise if you think I'm correct in explaining why you agree. So those of you listening on, that you agree that banter is problematic, and give me a virtual hand raise if you agree, because banter can be the root cause of disagreements, of arguments, of a difference in perspectives when it comes to conflicts in young people. And banter can often be used as a justification for bullying behaviors. Perhaps it's this whole notion of banter in air quotes, because this is actually what young people will use as a justification. And if those of you that disagree that banter is problematic, because, well, we've gone through a definition. So how can banter be as problematic if the other person's in on the joke? They know that there's no malice. Okay, there's meant to be a joke between friends. How can that be as problematic? And it's interesting because I think it genuinely comes down to students using it as a justification, using it incorrectly, using it without knowing a true definition. And perhaps what if somebody is bantering or joking about something that's crossed the line and that the other person doesn't feel comfortable with? Then again, we're entering into very different territory. But it would be really useful to kind of do this activity with your students so that they start to understand or address the different perspectives as to what banter is, to what bullying is. So that was very interesting. We're going to go on to the second one now and see which way you vote. And it's kind of linking to what we've just said. So if someone is my friend, we can banter about whatever we like. Would you strongly agree? Agree? Disagree? Strongly disagree? If someone's my friend, we can banter about whatever we like. We have a very interesting spectrum of opinion for this one, ranging from every answer that you could give, strongly agree to strongly disagree, which is exactly what I would like, and something that I would absolutely be promoting if you were to do this with students, is having that confidence to be able to explain the difference in opinion across the spectrum and why. Only through this type of communication and dialogue are students going to really feel comfortable trying to explore these issues in a bit more detail. I'm going to give you a few more seconds. Got 81% of you voting. And I'll try and unpick this as best I can. This is the point where when I do this activity physically with staff, the conversations that are birthed out of these statements are absolutely brilliant. You're able to see such a different spectrum of opinion that people can appreciate these different nuances. I'm going to give you 3 seconds, 2, 1. All right, let's have a look. So we have some votes for strongly agree. We've got 22% agree, 59% disagree, and then 11% strongly disagree. So every single answer on the spectrum here. Now, I've done this with staff members, I've done this with young people, and I'm just going to explain some of the reasons why they have answered in a different way, and hopefully that might resonate with and match why you voted as well. So if someone's my friend, we can banter about whatever we like. If you strongly agree with that, is that perhaps because you are friends, so you know each other well, you know the topics that you would usually joke about, you have that very close relationship, and you know that they are always going to take it as a joke because you are friends, you've established that relationship, there's never going to be much ambiguity because you have that kind of experience. If you agree with that, then that might be why you voted that way. But we do have the majority of you that disagree. Now, is that because there are some topics that just aren't worth joking about? If there's a risk that you might upset someone, is it worth taking that risk? But then you could argue that, yeah, but you're friends, so you should know that risk, you should measure that risk. But perhaps, is it ever acceptable to banter about things like race, about sexuality, about family issues? If somebody just had a family grievance, are you going to joke and banter about that probably straight away? Probably not. So there are clear things that you probably wouldn't address. But it's interesting, right? Because is it subjective? Does it depend on the person? Does it depend on somebody's level of what they consider to be funny? Does it consider people's personal resilience about certain issues? Or is it just that there are certain things that are out of bounds, that there is a mutual understanding between friends as to what you joke or what you don't joke about? But it's interesting, there has to be an element of subjectivity here. But then how do you have subjectivity when you're trying to teach the difference between banter and bullying to students in school? Because as soon as you leave that open to subjectivity, you're going to have different rules for different people. You definitely need a clear blanket line as to what's acceptable to speak about and what's not. But how do you do that when different people have different levels of what they think is funny, or what makes them laugh, or what they just don't want to address? This can be really, really tricky. But only by talking about this are we ever going to be able to explore it in a kind of calm way, in which students feel comfortable to be able to share their opinions. And it's brilliant that staff are listening along, that you do have a spectrum of opinion, because that's what's going to happen with students. It's about trying to open this dialogue. So we're going to go on to the last statement, and we'll see which way you vote on this one. So the next one, statement number 3, people should just lighten up and know when to take a joke. What do we think? Agree, disagree? People should just lighten up and know when to take a joke. This particular statement definitely resonates when people describe my generation as the snowflake generation, the type of millennials that just can't take a joke, that are always fighting for injustices, and this kind of perhaps this PC culture. These are all the types of things that I've heard that aren't necessarily either correct or incorrect. These are people's opinions, and there are always reasons for those opinions, and also reasons why people disagree. And that's also kind of a beautiful thing that we should be promoting in schools, and even at primary school level. It's definitely beneficial to have these types of conversations, so that perhaps students that don't understand why somebody else might be offended might be able to have a glimpse into that reason. You've got 72% of you voting so far, so I'll give you a few more seconds. What do we think? People should just lighten up and know when to take a joke, maybe, in some circumstances. In every circumstance, maybe not. Give you 3 seconds. 2, 1. All right, let's have a look at these results. So we have a couple of votes for agree. Majority are saying disagree, and then quite a few of you strongly disagree. And it's interesting, right? Because I'm 26 years old. I am the millennial generation, which does have connotations of being the snowflake generation, which, if you haven't heard that phrase, it's basically these 20-odd-year-old young people that can never take a joke, that get offended by everything, that are living the world by this PC culture, in which you can't say anything anymore without offending somebody. I've heard it quite a lot, especially living in London, but also when I go back up north, there's a big difference in opinion there. But it's very interesting, isn't it? When we talk about the issues we said before, if you're friends, you can joke about whatever you want. Is that acceptable for a wider society? Are there issues that you just don't joke about? But then how about this? And again, I'm kind of playing devil's advocate in a way. If you are making a genuine joke about someone and you think that the other person might find it funny, that could break barriers. That could lead to bonding about a certain issue. But then it's really difficult to walk that line as to what's acceptable to talk about and what isn't. But in the end, if somebody is truly offended by something you said, then they obviously haven't found it funny. Is it appropriate to then just keep exploring that, keep pushing it again and again? Or are you just going to isolate people? Are you just going to upset and offend somebody? And if there's a different way in which you can say something that doesn't offend, why wouldn't you take that decision? You know, it's interesting. For example, one thing that I've discussed with staff members is the phrase "man up." This phrase "man up" has been used generationally for decades, hundreds of years, and it's never been used to cause offense. But if it's now entering a society in which men or my generation of men perhaps don't feel comfortable to speak about things emotionally because this phrase of man up is where men don't talk about their feelings. If this is starting to have a negative impact, is it perhaps the time to maybe change this phrase? That's not downtrodden the traditional use and saying that anybody who uses the phrase man up is being misogynistic or sexist or is pushing away men's emotions. They're just saying it because it's a phrase they've heard used by their parents or their grandparents. But if now we're entering a phase where we can use a different phrase, should we? All these different things that are interesting to explore. And thank you, staff, for playing along. And it's very interesting to see such a difference in opinion. This is an example of something that could be worthwhile doing along with your students. How can we take this back to school? Try and get primary school, get our young people to think about these different issues and have the confidence to agree and disagree with each other and explain why. Because only through that exploration are we able to perhaps address these issues. And to do that at primary school level could be really, really beneficial. So I hope this kind of opened up our thoughts to these different issues. And this is something that we could perhaps do when we go back to school. So the last aim of today's webinar was looking at causes of bullying behavior. And we're going to explore these now. So the first cause that we've discovered, which might lead to a young person exhibiting bullying behavior, are cultural influences. Our young people live and breathe in the digital world. They're on their phones, their iPads, their laptops. For primary school, it's probably more likely going to be a tablet, and they're definitely going to be on some type of one of these cultural influences. In fact, the most popular influence of this type of primary school age is YouTube, watching all of these different types of videos. But what are the things that they're watching? It can also be things like Netflix. They're playing online games, and this is obviously going to spill into the classroom. Give me a virtual raise of the hand if you've heard of the game Fortnite. Anyone listening along heard of the game Fortnite? Quite a few of you. This has been one of the most touted reasons for bullying behavior from staff and students of the last year, 2 years. You can be bullied because you're the worst player on the game. You can be bullied because you don't have the game. All of these different things that are going to spill into the classroom and influence behavior. Up next, we have social causes. What I mean by this is when a young person acts out, because any attention from you as a staff member is better than no attention at all. What is going on behind the scenes? Why are the young person craving that attention? Definitely digging in a little bit more detail with that one. Next, we have institutional. Now, this is where something is perhaps just said or done frequently and not addressed immediately in a manner that should be taken seriously. A common phrase around the UK still is, "Oh, that's so gay." Now, this is interesting. Give me a virtual hand raise if you agree that the vast majority of young people that use the term "that's so gay," that's not coming from a place of hate towards homosexuals. It's coming from, unfortunately, just an overuse and an ignorance as to where that term actually comes from. I don't believe that young people use this term and are being homophobic, but that doesn't excuse its use. And that doesn't mean that as educators, we don't have a responsibility to address this and just explain why it's offensive. And this comes back to this notion of intent when it comes to bullying behavior. If you sit down a group of primary school students and you say, actually, this is what the word gay means. This is where the word comes from in history. This is why there's a group of people that are still facing discrimination around the world. And this is why if you use this word, you're likely to really upset that person. If you have that conversation and then a young person chooses to use that word, they are doing so knowingly. But we're going to give them the chance first, because like we've all agreed with the hand raisers, I don't believe this is coming from a place of hate. It's just coming from a place of lack of education and awareness. So as educators, let's give them that choice. Let's give them that historical context, and then we can try to address these types of institutional phrases across the country. And as an organisation, the Dialogue, this is something we are absolutely championing and trying to change throughout the country. So next is power. Being the aggressor, being the perpetrator, being the bullying behaviour means that you are likely to not get bullied yourself. If you was perhaps seen as dominant, you're the alpha, then you might not get targeted. Now, this isn't very common in primary school, but as young people are starting to go through things like puberty, they're starting to find themselves in the social standing, social status of school. This is often a decision that young people take. I don't want to be on the receiving end. So actually, if these older lads see me picking on this lad, well, I say lads, girls can bully too. Something I definitely have a really bad habit of that. Girls definitely can exhibit bullying behavior, but this is something that can happen in school. But the thing is, if we find out that that's why a young person is exhibiting bullying behavior, we can start to have the conversations. We can start to put in measures to try and address that and change it. So these are 4 common ones. We're going to go on to the next one. Blaming the target. Now, if that kid just lost a little bit of weight, nobody would pick on him. Or if that girl didn't change her hair color every week, nobody would have a go at her. Or actually, if that lad just brushed his teeth, nobody would pick on him. True? False? The thing is, maybe it is true, but are we going to start with the actions of an individual to justify bullying behavior? Absolutely not. This is this whole concept of blaming the target. But the thing is, I've heard staff members across the country say it. Oh, if they just lost a bit of weight, nobody would call them fat. What happens to the young people that are exhibiting this type of behavior if they've just been encouraged and justified by a staff member? Are they going to have any incentive to stop? Absolutely not. They've just been given free rein. They've just been justified. Oh, Miss agrees. We're only doing it because he's chunky. These types of issues, blaming the target, absolutely backwards. This is the wrong type of behavior, and this needs addressing for students, but also for any staff members that you hear using this types of language. Please be the upstander as educators, and please address this as soon as you hear it. The next 3 are quite linked. So family issues, personal history, reciprocating behavior. We cannot control what happens at home. Probably one of the biggest frustrations that we have as staff and educators. And we don't know what a young person has just come in from. We can only control what we do in school. And this is a very likely cause as to any type of bullying behavior or any type of ignorance. Perhaps they use racial language, homophobic language. You are not born with these, with this in mind. It's coming from something you've heard, and often that is from the home life. But as staff, if we are able to recognize this and communicate that to other staff, then perhaps we can start to put in mediation issues and put in things in place to address all of these causes. And to be honest, that's quite a common theme. No matter what the cause is, if we're able to find it out, we can then start to have conversations with a young person and start to address why they're acting in this way. Perhaps move them away from being the aggressor, and we can start to put in things that might help the young person. So these are the most common types of causes that we found. I hope some of these are helpful. And we're now going to go on to some resources. So we've mentioned quite a lot in today's session. We've gone through banter and bullying behavior. We've gone through causes. And now I'm going to hopefully give you some helpful resources listening along that you can either send to young people who are stuck in lockdown, but also send to parents, or things that we can bear in mind as we gear up to go back into school. So the first one, we've teamed up with Crisis Messenger, and we have a 24/7 text service for anybody who is going through something negative. We have trained professionals on the other side to help through a multitude of different issues. Now, this might be bullying behavior, but it also might be things like loneliness. We have young people stuck at home, isolated from their friends during lockdown. This has been going on for about 4 months now. So we might need to offer them something that they can text and get support from. And also, give me a virtual raise of the hand and sing along if you agree that sometimes it can actually be easier to speak to somebody about a problem, somebody who doesn't know you, you can speak to somebody anonymously that isn't able to judge you because they don't know what it is that you're coming from. Our young people are no different. And so by having kind of an anonymous helpful service on the other side might be something that young people use. So please, if you think this might be helpful, send it out to parents, send it out to fellow staff members, and crucially send it out to our young people who might be having all of these different mental health worries and concerns during lockdown, but also as we progress to going back to school. For you lovely staff listening along, we do have a Facebook group, which is full of staff that we've trained all over the UK. We have hundreds of staff in this group, and it could be a really useful place to network, share best practice, share the things that you're tackling in school, things that you're doing well, and it could be a really good place to network. But it's quite funny that I have to say this, but I do. Staff, if you join the Facebook group, Please don't try and sell your own literature. It sounds ridiculous, but some teachers are joining the group and then trying to get other teachers to buy their books or whatever it is they publish. So please don't do that. It's not the point. We'll likely kick you off the group. Next, we have our own bank of resources. So when lockdown hit, as an organization, we asked ourselves, now that we're not physically in schools, what can we do to really help those who need it most? How do we help those students? How do we help staff? And so what we did is we completely rejuvenated our resources bank. So we have things like lesson plans, campaign ideas, blog posts, support articles. There's so many things on there. So please do take a look. But crucially, if you have a look and you notice that there's something missing, do get in touch, because we are tailoring our resources to what staff and students need. So let us know, we'll create it, or we can send it directly to you. Finally, the Anti-Bullying Alliance have some brilliant CPD accredited training modules, which really help to explore bullying behavior in more detail. Things like group bullying, SEN, all of these different types of issues. Now, I have to admit as well, if I used to be an English teacher, and if I still had my class of students, I would absolutely get them to do this training. It's very child friendly, and it really helps to solidify that understanding. And actually, this is something that young people could do now whilst at home. Even primary school age, it is very, like I say, very child friendly and could really help their understanding. So feel free to have a look yourselves, perhaps do a couple of the modules, and if you think it'll be worthwhile, this could be brilliant to send out to students or to do upon our return. So these are some helpful resources, hopefully. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to open it up to any questions at all about anything we've discussed today, anything about anti-bullying. Please do feel free to write it in the Q&A box. I'm going to have a look at these now. I'm going to hopefully be able to answer these as best I can in real time. We have one now. So I think it's a great idea for the students to make their own posters on identifying differences between bullying behavior and banter. Absolutely is. This is a really quick and easy win, especially for primary school who love to do something creative, who love to design and draw and color. Get them to create their own signs that they can put up in a classroom, they can put up at an entrance or an exit, because crucially, that's where parents are most likely to be able to see it as well. Entrance or an exit to school, at a notice board, so that there's a really clear difference that as staff, you are able to address behavior really quickly and really easily. Is there anything at all that we have to answer? We did have a pre-prepared question, someone coming through, but yeah, do feel free to ask anything at all. I'm going to check the chat box if our lovely moderator Hannah has anything to ask, or the pre-prepared question might be actually in the chat function. I'm just going to have a quick look. When should matters be communicated to the police? Parents often have strong views on this. This is a very interesting question, and especially for primary school, it's unlikely that you are going to get something that's as serious as taken to the authorities, but it absolutely does happen, and I don't want to dismiss that as something that isn't worth discussing. So how do we communicate something to the police, or what matters should be communicated? To be honest, as staff, you really just have to think about the types of issues that have come up with young people. Is it going to be something that puts a young person in danger? We all have our basic duties as safeguarding, our duty of care. And so if we think that that is compromised, if we think that safeguarding is compromised, then we obviously pass it on to our safeguarding lead in school. If we think it's serious enough, then absolutely call the local police line, our police liaison. And it's probably just going to be matters when you think that a young person is at significant risk of harm, whatever that might be. That might be physical, it might be due to mental health, it might be due to cyber security, cyber issues, exploitative imagery, all of these different types of things. If you think that that significant risk of harm has been breached, then absolutely, that is when issues should be communicated to the police. We have one more. We have one from Martin. How do you explain to someone who is displaying bullying behavior but simply doesn't see that he is doing wrong? Very, very good question. And the thing is with this, it comes back to this notion of intent. If someone genuinely doesn't understand what they're doing wrong, then in their mind, they are not exhibiting bullying behavior. So how do we get them to see it from a different point of view? It's demonstrating the impact, demonstrating the effect, the impact of their words or actions on somebody else. So if, as an educator, as a staff member, if you think they are bullying somebody, exhibiting this behavior, then there must be an impact on somebody else. There must be either really upsetting someone, affecting their level of self-esteem, affecting their confidence. They're going home sad. They might be going home crying. The person needs to see that impact. They need to understand that this has happened. This impact has been had from what I've done, from what I've said. So it's really about getting them to see it in that way, getting them to see the impact from the target of that behavior, either by the target telling them, explaining to them, and really trying to see it from that perspective. We have another question from Sarah. Thank you for this. We are a through school. How different is your senior session later? Well, in the secondary session this afternoon, I'm kind of been exploring different issues about how do you explain to secondary school students the difference. In primary school, it's really just about explaining that understanding, perhaps doing a poster competition. In secondary school, with a higher level of understanding, we need to assume a greater level of responsibility for young people. When primary school, perhaps it's difficult to understand the difference or difficult to understand the definition of bullying behavior. In secondary school, they do have a greater level of understanding. And we have a definitely a bigger risk of secondary school students hiding behind banter, using it as a justification. It is incredibly rife in schools, and it's going to be really tackling, battling that justification and exploring that in more detail. Thank you so much for people who've submitted a question. Just want to say thank you so much for everybody listening along. It is amazing to have so many of you staff with us. And again, I really do mean this. The fact that you staff are with us today means that you care enough to try and educate yourselves on these issues because you want better, you want more for your own student group. And that says a lot just you being here. I've said this before, but please, we are trying to improve these webinars as best we can. The only people that can tell us how to improve are the people listening along, which is you lovely staff. So if you haven't already, please do fill in a feedback form on this link. Let us know the types of issues that you'd like to explore, how we can be of more use, the types of resources we can send out, and how this webinar series can be better for you staff. It would be really, really beneficial for us, and it would be really appreciated. I'm going to leave this up on screen. We have 2 more webinars planned: rewriting your school's anti-bullying policy, how to make your anti-bullying campaign a success. I'm going to leave this up on screen. Please do follow us on socials because all of our previous webinars are going to be put up on demand as well. If I don't see you this afternoon, have an absolutely wonderful day. We hope to see you in more webinars soon. And it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much.